before Christmas, because Christmas is a Friday. This is the last Friday before Christmas. Well, it's starting to feel Christmassy around here. Very blessed Advent to you. That means it's the last Friday of Advent as well. And maybe it's possible that this whole wild year has gotten you in the mood for Christmas. But it seems to me more likely that we might, if you're at all like me, it's harder. It's harder to get in the mood and the spirit of anticipation for Christmas. So we have 2 hours of radio today entirely devoted to getting you ready for the feast of the birth of the Lord on Christmas Day. And with second hour, Jimmy Akin is going to be here, and we're going to talk about how the Bible stories of the Nativity of Jesus came about and many other things about the Nativity. And this hour, we are going to reflect on the Nativity of the Lord in a very unique way with one of our favorite guests. Steve Ray, of course, is our guest, and he's a convert to the Catholic Church, best-selling author of a bunch of books, Crossing the Tiber, Upon This Rock, The Faith for Beginners, Understanding the Creeds. He's also well known from all kinds of different media presentations. You hear him on Catholic radio all around the country. He works with EWTN. He's made some wonderful videos right in the footsteps of where people like Abraham and Moses walked. You can find out all about Steve at CatholicConvert.com. And what we're going to do with Steve today is we're going to talk about the people and the things of the internet. I mean, of the nativity. I don't know how I said internet. People and things of the nativity of Jesus. Steve, thanks for being with us.
You're welcome. Thank you. This is the only show I do like this without my hat, because I have to have this headphones on for your show, and I can't wear the hat and this. So I hope there's not too much glare here today.
No, you're looking healthy and well. Not much glare at all, actually.
Yeah.
So, Steve, I have to ask you about this before we get into the people and things of the Nativity. And you were kind enough to send me notes on that, and I'm fascinated by some of the things that you picked in relation to the birth of Jesus. But you are the man who takes people on pilgrimage. So are you ever going again? Are you done? What's up?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you're going?
No, we've been grounded for a year because of this virus hysteria going on, but we're going back next year. We have 8 trips planned, 5 to the Holy Land, starting in April, 1 St. Paul cruise, 10 biblical sites all through Turkey and Greece. We have Ireland, and we have Lourdes and Fatima. We're going to start in Portugal and go up through Portugal, Spain, and France and visit the Marian shrines and St. Compostela, where St. James is. And so we've got our pilgrimages are back on the road. You can go to my website, CatholicConvert.com, and I've got them all listed. And for the next 2 years, we've got them all listed coming up. And we're excited to get back in the air again.
Yeah, and back on the water, too. So you do a cruise it must hit parts of Greece and Turkey, essentially, right, with St. Paul?
Yep, and the Greek islands. We're going to hit Corinth, Athens, Philippi, Thessalonica, Istanbul, Pergamum, Ephesus, and Patmos. All of those are biblical sites, and some of them have 2 or 3 biblical sites attached to them. So we're going to visit all of those, and I'm taking 8 of my grandkids.
Oh, wonderful! That is just great. Well, it's good to know you're back on the road again, because that's your life in many ways, is taking people to see the holy sites.
Not only our income, so we haven't had any income for a year, but that's minor. The Lord's always been good taking care of us, but it's what we love to do. I love to visit those places and share them with Catholics.
All right, so let's if there's more. I have more things to reveal of what Steve has. Some wonderful things up his sleeve in 2021. So there's more coming. I'm going to reveal some more during the progress of the hour. But I want to get into the notes that you gave me about the nativity of the Lord. And by focusing on people and things, I think you put us in the place. And the first thing you wanted to focus on was Bethlehem. Tell us a bit about Bethlehem's role in the nativity of God, the man.
That's
the God
very
man.
Central. Yeah, it's been known it was centuries and centuries. They knew that the baby was going to be born there. In fact, when Herod talked to the wise men, who we'll discuss in a bit, where is this place? The prophet said he's going to be born in Bethlehem. And we know that because in Micah 5:2 says, "Oh, but you, Bethlehem Ephratah." Ephratah is another name for Bethlehem. So you, Bethlehem, who are too small to be among the clans of Judah, yet from you shall come forth the one who is to be the ruler of Israel, whose coming is of old and ancient days. That means forever. So it's from you is going to come the eternal king. So they knew. They were waiting. Bethlehem means house of bread. It's 2 words, Lechem. Bet Lechem, 2 words, house of bread. And interestingly enough, what's in Mary's womb? The bread of life.
Yeah.
Mary is going to the house of bread to deliver the bread. So this has all been planned for centuries and centuries before of what was going to happen there. And Bethlehem was chosen because Joseph was from the tribe of Judah. Bethlehem is in the area, the province, or you could say like the state of Judea, where the tribe of Judah was. And by the way, from Judah, we get the word Jew and Judaism. They come from the tribe of Judah. And that's where David's ancestral home. So his great-great-great-grandparents, who knows how far back, were from Bethlehem. So when Herod said, from Rome said, everybody has to, this was not Herod, this was Rome, everybody has to go back to their ancestral home to fill in the census. We just had the census in the United States this year, and to pay the tax. So now he has to go all the way down. But that was planned ahead of time by God, because he had to get Mary from Nazareth, which is 100 miles away. This was a 100-mile journey for them to go from Nazareth on foot to Bethlehem. And to get them there, we're going to have a census to make sure the baby's born where Micah said he's going to be born.
It does give you that sense that you get again and again and again with these things. The Holy Spirit's in charge. The Holy Spirit arranges, especially in the life of Jesus, so that every prophecy will be fulfilled, every sign is given in the life of Jesus.
And one thing we can remember real quickly, though, is that, sometimes we think God doesn't take very good care of us. Why don't you do more for me? Why don't you pick me up when I fall down? Why don't you make it so I'm not so poor and I can pay? Well, look at how his son came into the world. His son came in a little backwater town called Bethlehem, too small to be among the clans of Judah, born in a cave that was very unsanitary, and that's where his son came into the king ready to kill him. I think we're in much better position than Jesus came into the world.
Steve Ray is our guest. We're talking about the people and things of the Nativity. Let's talk about Rachel's tomb. I was surprised that you put this on the list. It had not occurred to me before. Tell me about the relationship of Rachel's tomb to the birth of Jesus.
Every time we drive with our groups on pilgrimages into Bethlehem, I always point out Rachel's tomb on the right-hand side, right when we're entering into Bethlehem. It's still 4,000 years later. It is still now a place where Jews go. It is a synagogue where they go to pray at the tomb of Rachel. But here's why I added it in. 2,000 years before Joseph and Mary came down the same road that we drive on, called the Hebron Road between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, 2,000 years before Mary and Joseph, Jacob, the patriarch, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, was traveling down that same road with his camels and his wives, and he had a wife named Rachel whom he loved. And right when they got to Bethlehem, she was very, very pregnant. And she got off the camel, said, I can't go any further, got off the camel and gave birth to the baby right there at the entrance of Bethlehem. A funny story, my daughter gave birth to a baby a little while ago. We were going to babysit for the little guy. When she went off, she got in the car and said, I'm not going to make it, came back in and gave birth to the baby on the kitchen floor. All are well, but that...
I'm glad to hear. Yeah.
It's not like Rachel, because when Rachel gave birth to Benjamin there, she died in childbirth, and they buried great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma off the side of the road. And 4,000 years later, we still remember that place. And when Joseph and Mary were taking that walk on donkey or not on a donkey, we'll talk about that in a minute, they had to go past the tomb of Rachel, and it was marked. They knew it was there. Joseph is also taking a very, very pregnant woman.
Right.
And don't think that he didn't look over and say, oh, dear God, please take care of my wife.
Right.
Because they passed by that and thought about a 9-month-old woman who gave birth and died right there on the spot. Some people say, well, that would never happen to Jesus because God had a special plan. So not like Rachel, this couldn't have happened. Oh, but remember what happened when the baby was born. An angel came to Joseph and says, quick, they're going to try and kill the baby. Quick, escape.
Yeah.
So there were dangers. There were dangers involved.
Yeah, it's always easy to look back in hindsight and say that didn't happen, but it's the foresight that where the
Right.
the lack of knowledge makes it all. They walked in so much faith, and it's wonderful to think about that. Walking by the tomb of Rachel, they're connected to their ancestors in every way. They're connected to, just really to thousands of years of
Yep.
Jewish history, and here they are about to see the Messiah for the one that they've all awaited.
And Rachel would have been one of Mary's saints. Mary had heroes like we do. We
Right.
have saints that we look up to. And Rachel was one of Mary's, and Sarah. And so, and people would never think of mentioning Rachel's tomb near Bethlehem because people don't understand the proximity of things. But when you're in the land, I've ridden my bicycle from Jerusalem to Bethlehem and back many times. I have a bicycle in Jerusalem, and I've ridden my bike back and forth through the Israeli checkpoint. Every time I stop and say a prayer at Rachel's tomb. And because when you're there and you see the proximity, you get, just think, one day I said, Joseph went past that place where his great-great-great-great-grandmother died in childbirth. Of course he thought of that when he was taking Mary into Bethlehem.
Indeed. Steve Ray is our guest. We're talking about the people and the things of the Nativity. If there's something you'd like to ask about that you associate with the Nativity, whether it's the shepherds or the gifts or the places, anything like that, you're welcome to call and ask Steve. 888-318-7884. We're all devoted to the Nativity today, trying to get you ready for 1 week from today when we celebrate the coming of the Lord. 888-318-7884.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Unplanned, the true story of Abby Johnson.
I would be the youngest director in Planned Parenthood history.
She believed in a woman's right to choose.
I've had an abortion myself, so I don't have any problem with another woman making the same decision.
Until the day she saw something that changed everything.
Tiny, perfect little baby. And then it was just gone.
Now she's pulling back the curtain on the abortion industry. Unplanned.
Available at EWTNRC.com and the EWTN app.
Steve Ray is our guest this hour. Jimmy Akin's our guest next hour, and both hours are entirely devoted to the birth of the Lord in Bethlehem, which we will celebrate 1 week from today on Christmas Day. A very blessed Advent to you and all of yours. I hope it is progressing with many blessings and that it's a happy time, despite the many challenges that we have this year. Steve, you can find out all about Steve, and we talked a little bit about his 8 pilgrimages that he's going to do this year. You can find out about all that and anything else Steve is doing at CatholicConvert.com. It's really easy to remember, CatholicConvert.com. But Steve, I'm very impressed that you're not just doing 8 pilgrimages this year. You're really going to help next year. That's right. We're not in 2021 yet. That would be pretty good if you finished with 8 pilgrimages. In January, in early January of next year, you are really going to help Catholics to crack open that Bible and understand what's going on in there. Yep.
January 8th through 10. It's called Take and Read, A Journey into the Bible. I woke up in the middle of the night and said to my wife, we got to do a Bible conference for Catholics. They're afraid of the Bible. They don't know how to get started. They're intimidated by it. Let's put on a conference. So it's a virtual conference, and I've already got 50 of the very best speakers across the country. And I have a list of names on my website, but they include people like Jeff Cavins and Scott and Kimberly Hahn and Peter Kraft and John Bergsma and a whole host of others. 50 of them already signed up, and it's going to be everything about the Bible. Everything, how to study it, how to introduce the Bible to your kids, the Bible and the liturgy. What about archaeology? Does it prove the Bible? It's going to be fantastic, and we're really excited about it, and it's free. Absolutely free. People can log in. They got to get registered ahead of time. And then you can, for those days, the 8th through the 10th, you can step into any one of those auditoriums and listen to any one of those 50 speakers talk. And we've got a lot of live things. I'm going to be interviewing my bishop live. I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Peter Kraft live. We're also going to have real live demonstrations on how to use the latest Bible Catholic software. So it's going to be quite an event.
And it's my favorite price too, Steve. That is my absolute favorite price. Congratulations on doing that. Good for you.
You're welcome.
It's so much that we need. It's just magnificent that you're doing that. I want people to be able to call and talk with you. 888-318-7884, the number. 888-318-7884. We're talking entirely about the people and things of the Nativity. Since there's already folks on the line, I'm going to let them ask their questions, and I'll go back to my list if time permitting. Let's go to Columbus, Ohio. Listening on 820 AM in Columbus is Mark. Mark, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question about the people and things of the Nativity for Steve Ray.
Hey there, gentlemen. Hey, Steve.
Hello, Mark.
I was just curious, who are the wise men, and why did they bring gifts?
Okay, first of all, let me deal with the gifts. There are 3 gifts that are mentioned, and so we assume there are 3 wise men. But in reality, we don't know how many wise men there are. Some have speculated as few as 2, and others as many as 10. Because the Bible doesn't tell us how many there are, only that there were 3 gifts, so we assume that each one brought a gift. The gifts that they brought, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, are gifts fit for a king. That's what we know about the gifts. These are not gifts that you give to anybody. These are kingly gifts. If you are an emissaries from one foreign country to come to another to meet the king, these are the kind of gifts you would bring. One of them is gold, and the early church fathers said the gold represented royalty. And that was Jesus' divinity, his royalty. And the frankincense is something that priests use, incense in the temple. So it's for the priestly position of Jesus. And myrrh is rather strange because usually myrrh has to do with embalming a dead person. So it's when you come to a baby's birth, it's like bringing their coffin. Say, we want to give you a gift of a coffin. Because myrrh was used in burial, and it's like, in a way, a looking forward to the death and burial of Christ. But we don't know where they came from. There's a new book out on the wise men by Father Longenecker that speculates that they were Nabateans that came from the area of Jordan, where we have Petra. I take groups to Petra all the time in Jordan, which is down way south of the Dead Sea. And so they could very well have been the Nabateans, who were like the desert people who came from the Petra area in there. But the majority of scholars believe that they were what we would call a priestly Persians, priestly caste of people who specializes in astrology, interpretation of dreams and magic, that kind of a thing. And we have a lot of mention to magi's in other writings, and it refers to those kind of people that either they're from Mesopotamia, which means between the rivers. That would be referring to the Euphrates River. That was kind of like the far eastern boundary. Abraham came from on the other side. But over there is Babylon and Persia and those countries. And the majority of scholars believe that the Magi were some kind of a priestly caste of people who came from that place, Persia, or Iraq or Iran of today. If you want to put it on today's calendar, it'd be Iraq or Iran. And by the way, it would have been a 1,600-mile journey. This is not a journey that they just like jumped in a taxi and came, the taxi camels, Uber camels. They just jumped on camels and came there. This was because when you leave the Far East on the other side of the Euphrates in the Iraq or Persian area, you can't go directly west to Judea because that's the Arabian desert. So you'd have to follow the Euphrates and Tigris River up north. It's called the Fertile Crescent. Everybody had to travel that way. You followed the river up into what's today Turkey. And I've been to all those places, crossed the Euphrates, all those places. In our making of the movie on Abraham, and they would have to travel like some from Iraq or Persia of today up along the Tigris and Euphrates River into Turkey, and then down through Syria of today into what was called Canaan or Israel at the time. So this was a long journey these guys took. They had to commit themselves to a long journey. Now, the star, you want to talk about the star too, or just the wise men?
Mark?
Yeah, mostly just the wise men.
Oh, well, I want to
Okay.
hear about the star. Come on now. Don't leave us hanging, Mark.
Well, did I answer your question about the wise men?
Yes.
All right, Mark. Thank you very
Okay.
much. All right, before we go back to a call, I do want to hear what you have to say about the star.
I may make people mad at me by saying this. I hope not. But a lot of people look for natural explanations, that there are a conjoining of planets. In fact, I guess on December 21st, there's going to be Jupiter and some others that are going to be close, and it's going to be a big light in the sky. And it was something like that might have happened back in Jesus' time, or that it was a comet or an asteroid or some alignment of stars. I don't think that's the case. I am of the opinion that it was like a miraculous GPS star. And I say GPS star because the Gospel of Matthew mentions it several times, but the interesting point is where it says the star that they had seen when it rose, so it's not just standing still in the sky. Maybe it looks like it rises because the earth is spinning, but it rose and it went before them. Now, a normal star, say it's the conglomeration of planets or stars or something, it's not going to go on before them. It's going to be right there in the sky, and in the morning it's going to be gone. But this star, it says it went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. So I am of the opinion, and there's no reason to think otherwise, that God did a miracle and there was a special star or light that literally led these guys like a GPS. And it took them right to the place where the baby was, and then it stopped over that place where the baby was. Now, some speculate it could be an angel, because in the Old Testament, angels and light are oftentimes interchangeable. An angel of light or a light. I didn't write these down, but there's a lot of places in the Old Testament where you can see angels and light are kind of synonymous, or they seem to function the same. So it could have been an angel. But why do we doubt that it was a special light that God used to bring these men to visit the new king of Israel? So that's my take on it.
We're talking about the people and things of the Nativity. If you have questions about the people and things that you remember from Matthew and Luke's Gospels about the Nativity, or maybe from a tradition that you have heard of, maybe you don't know where you heard it, but you'd like to ask about it, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884, 888-31-TRUTH. Up next is Jerry in San Antonio, Texas. Jerry, go ahead with your question for Steve Ray.
Yes. Hey, Steve, how are you doing? I have
Hello,
been
Jerry.
to the Church of the Nativity, and
Yes.
I wanted to know why there's such a low entrance to get in, and why there seems to be such a conflict in that area for saying Mass, and we had to wait in line, and there's another group ahead of us, and then there's so there just seemed like a lot of division when we went into that church.
Oh, there is. Oh, there's tremendous division. Let me deal with that one first. When the Ottoman Empire took over that area, that was the Turks, the Muslims, that church was controlled by the Roman Catholic Church, which are called the Latins. That's the name for Roman Catholic. It's the Latin Catholics. And they were in charge of that church. But what happened was the Ottoman Empire knew that they could control, the statement, united we stand, divided we fall. And they said, if we divide this up between the different traditions, we can never let any of them have too much control. We'll be they won't get too strong. Now, in the Middle East, unfortunately, there are a lot of divisions. There are 3 different groups that control the real estate in the Church of Nativity. The largest one is the Greek Orthodox. They own the central nave of the church and the front altar. They also own the place of Jesus' birth. The Armenians, they own the altar to the left of the main altar in the front. They own that area. The Catholics only own, if you remember when you went down in the grotto underneath to the birthplace of Christ, right behind that is another little altar. You take 3 steps down. That's because I take my groups there all the time. I have to explain all of this. And that is where Mary laid him in the manger. That place is owned by the Roman Catholics. It's about 10 feet by 10 feet. That's the only place that's owned by the Roman Catholics there. So those areas are very much under the control of those three different groups, and they all have what's called the status quo that was established by Britain that says that the Catholics can have the whole place only this time to celebrate a Mass on certain days, and it's very, very carefully laid out, and so there is a lot of tension and jealousy over those areas. And if you think it's bad at the Church of Nativity, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is divided up between 6 different groups: the Catholics, the Armenians, the Orthodox, the Coptics, the Syrians, and the one other. I can't think of it right off. But yeah, there is. I'll come to the second part of his question when we come back.
All right, we'll take a quick break. We're talking about the people and things of the Nativity on this Friday before the big day. Next Friday, Christmas. Right back after this with more Steve Ray.
We're waiting for your call. Grab that line and get on board.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, is one of the most courageous leaders in the church, known for his outspoken support of unborn life, Orthodox faith and morals, and reforming Catholic institutions. In his groundbreaking new book, Light and Leaven, he offers a forthright perspective on the state of the church today and calls on the lay faithful to meet its challenges boldly, touching on topics including parish renewal, the centrality of the Eucharist, the need for prayer and silence in a noisy and distracted age, and the battle between good and evil in the church and world. Bishop Strickland's wise insights and evident love for souls will inspire and edify you. To order your copy of Light and Leaven, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Monday on More to Life, home for the holiday.
Holidays looking a bit different this year. We'll help you make them special.
That's Monday on More to Life. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Steve Ray is our guest. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and we're talking about the Nativity of the Lord today. Steve, been there, I don't know, a million times or something like that, knows the whole area very, very well, and it's fun to talk with Steve about the people, the places, the things associated with the Nativity of the Lord, with the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. If you have a question in that regard, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. We have on the line right now Jerry in San Antonio, and you were finishing up your answer to why the Nativity Church in Bethlehem has such a low entrance.
Yep, and I'm going to try to answer these next questions quicker so we can get to a lot of them because they're good ones. The reason that you had to stoop down to get into the door of the Church of Nativity is because if you stand back and look, you'll see where there were 3 doors, original doors. There was a big one that was like 15 feet tall, and there's another one about 10 feet tall, and then there's the one where you go in now where you have to stoop, and if people with a bad back or bad knees have a hard time getting in. The reason for that was during the Ottoman Empire, they had no respect for the church, and they used it as a stable. So they would ride their horses and camels into the church. So the Franciscans, who were in control of it then, said, well, if you're going to do that, we're just going to make the door shorter so you can't bring your animals in. And that's what they did. And that's the reason that door's like that. Now, people like to make it into a nice spiritual application and saying it's appropriate that you have to stoop down and bow down before you enter the place where Jesus was born.
And it is. Thanks very much. Appreciate those questions, Jerry. We go now to Gretchen in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, listening on Oklahoma Catholic Radio. Gretchen, delighted to have you. Go ahead with your question for Steve Ray.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. My question is about the timeline between the Nativity and the presentation in the temple and the flight into Egypt.
Okay. Well, first of all, obviously the birth took place first. Now, there was a period of 40 days for a boy and 80 days for a girl where you had to make the presentation in the temple. And I won't go into all the details of that. That's another topic in all of itself. So they were at least let's put it this way. They were in the cave to give birth to the baby. When the wise men came, it said they went to the house. And that's one of my 19 things in Bethlehem. Wise men went to the house. So obviously they'd moved out of the cave where the animals were, and they moved into a house. Now the Franciscans have a place about a 10-minute walk from the Church of Nativity called the Milk Grotto. I'm not going to go into detail that, but that is where the Franciscans have a place. They said this is the house where the Holy Family moved after the cave. Now, they would have lived there for at least 40 days because they had to then go to Jerusalem, which is only 4 miles away. It's not a big deal. I mean, I've run back and forth back in my running days, many times run back and forth between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. By the way, I started at the tomb, and I would end my run I started my run at where the Jesus was born, and I ended my run at the tomb of Christ in Jerusalem, and I called it my womb to tomb run. So I'd tell my group, I'll see you in a little while. I'm going to go do my womb to tomb. And I'd run from the womb where he's born to the tomb. Anyway, so they would have to go to Jerusalem, which is only 4 miles away. And they would make the presentation there. That's what they'd have to do. Then they must have gone back to Bethlehem. And then he were warned by Joseph. The angel warned Joseph to flee. And then at that point, they would have had to leave to go to Egypt. We don't know how long they're in Egypt. The Egyptians speculate, because I've been down there and see the place where the Holy Family lived in Cairo, in the Jewish quarter. It's still there. And their tradition is that they traveled a lot there. But the speculation is they probably stayed in Egypt about a year to 18 months, and then they would have come back, and they went all the way then back up to Nazareth. Consider the miles, 250 miles to Egypt, 250 miles back, and then another 90 or 100 miles back up to Nazareth. One thing you can be certain about Mary, besides that she was immaculately conceived, is that she was one tough little Jewish girl.
How's that? Does that strike you, Gretchen? Does that all make sense?
That's great. No, I remember a verse. It's actually in a Rosary devotional that I listened to, an audio app, during the fourth joyful mystery after the presentation. It says, and after this, they returned to Nazareth and so on. And I was thinking, well, the flight into Egypt's got to be in there somewhere. But I imagine that part of the gospel was just summary.
Yeah.
Somewhere, I think people truncate things at times and leave out facts. But they could not have gone to Egypt and back 40 days in time for the presentation, because Egypt's 250 miles away. That would have been walking. Gretchen. And so I would say the birth, 40 days presentation. As soon as the presentation's over, they come back to Bethlehem, and then they have to go back up to Nazareth.
Thanks, Gretchen.
Or to Egypt.
Appreciate the call. 888-318-7884, number. We're talking about the Nativity, the people and things of the Nativity. You're welcome to call and ask Steve Ray your question. Up next is Mark in Warsaw, North Dakota. Mark, you there with us?
Yes, I am.
All right, Mark, right into the phone, because that's not a very good connection.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I can.
You just got to be real clear into the phone.
Okay. My question is, it seemed kind of unsafe for Joseph to just take off with Mary in the middle of the night. I mean, how was traveling, and even like going from to the visitation, or from Joseph and Mary going from Jerusalem all the way to Bethlehem, were they all alone?
Oh, yeah.
Good question. First of all, travel was dangerous. I have in my running around Israel. I have run and gone around a corner and there's a hyena right in front of me. I've run where there's really very poisonous serpents. And back in the time of Mary and Jesus, they had lions and bears and other even more dangerous animals. Also, if you remember the story of the man who went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and he was bushwhacked by the brigands and the thieves, and then the Good Samaritan took care of him, there was many times. You read Paul's accounts in 2 Corinthians 11, he talks about all the dangers of travel, of thieves and all kinds of dangers. So people traveled in caravans because that would give safety. And you would travel in a caravan. I think even Mary, when she went to the visitation, would not have gone alone. I'm sure family members went with her. Doesn't say that. But she would have had to join a caravan to go there because they'd also, that way you'd have food and water and the basic protections. Now, it does say there's an interesting document called the Proto-Evangelium of James. And it's not in the Bible. It's from the 2nd century, early 2nd century, and it's the document where we get the names of Mary's parents, Joachim and Anna. And in that document, it says that Joseph was an older man who had children from a previous marriage, and God chose this older man to be the husband of Mary to take good care of her. And this document actually says, and one of Joseph's sons led the donkey down to Bethlehem. Now, no, there's two views, that Joseph was an older man and that Joseph was a younger man. The oldest one, the oldest tradition, and the one held by the Eastern Church today, is that Joseph was an older man, a widower, who had sons and daughters who would then be the brothers and sisters of our Lord mentioned in the Gospels, and that one of those sons led the donkey. If that's the case, then there would be, it says the brothers of his sons came, so that would be at least Mary and Joseph and 2 of his sons. That would have been probably a safe way to go, because they would have been older guys that lead the donkeys. Now, if Joseph was just a young man, and I would think that they would join a caravan. So it's fun to speculate about these things. It's fun to do. But traveling was dangerous. And you would always try to go with other people for the safety value and for the security, and even for you'd go from one spring to a well because water was so important. And the caravans would know where to stop. You'd travel 20 miles a day. That's how far you could travel. And so every 20 miles there would be a stop-off point, like a camp. And there would be water there and maybe protection. And then you'd travel 20 miles another day to another water source. And it would be much safer and better traveling with that kind of with groups. I hope that helps answer your question.
Thanks, Mark. I hope it does too. We have to take a break. Before we take a break, 2 things, however. First of all, what do you do when you run into a hyena? I have no idea how to handle that situation.
He was as shocked as I was. And so we were came up 10 feet. I came around a corner and there he was. And I just went, woof, woof. I was raised on a farm. I'm not scared of animals. And I just went, woof, woof, and I ran at him and he took off like a bat out of hell because he was more afraid than I was. But I've seen a lot of animals when I do my runs through Israel. I've seen fox and all kinds of animals. And one time when we were driving our bus, we watched a whole pack of hyenas down in a field right next to us go after a herd of gazelles, and they surrounded the gazelles, and they were going after to try to get one of them. And so there's a lot of wild animals there.
In Jesus' time, would there have been the big animals like lions? Or
yes, remember it says that David, he said, the lion and a bear came after my sheep, and I killed them both. Yeah. And so we know that until the 13th century, there were lions and bears, but after the 10th or 13th century, they were no more. They were eliminated. But there are still other animals, and poisonous vipers too. I was confronted one on the road once.
We do have to take a quick break. We'll do that now. We've got hundreds of digital gifts with ebooks, MP3s, and e-magazines downloadable right now if you want at Catholic Answers. At shop.catholic.com. That's the Catholic Answers store. You can sign yourself up or a loved one for the School of Apologetics. That makes a great Christmas gift. Don't procrastinate. Time's running out. Christmas is just a week away today. Give the gift of faith at shop.catholic.com.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Do you love praying for people? Have you ever wanted to use your gift of prayer to share Jesus with others and build up the body of Christ? Start a public prayer station with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Listen to people's needs, pray with them, or invite them to meet you at church. St. Paul Street Evangelization can help you get started. Find out how at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Hi, this is Matt Swaim from the Sunrise Morning Show, wishing you a Merry Christmas. Christ is born, surrounded by the song of angels, proclaiming peace on earth and goodwill toward men. Come, let us adore our newborn King, whose kingdom is not of this world. May God richly bless you as you celebrate the birth of our Lord throughout the joyful season of Christmas. Peace, joy, and blessings to you and all of your families from all of us here at EWTN.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, talking about the Nativity, talking about the birth of Jesus with Steve Ray this hour. Next hour, Jimmy's going to be in to share his take on some of the Bible passages around the birth of Jesus. Steve goes there all the time and has a firsthand knowledge of so many of these places where the Lord walked, either as a child or as an adult. And so if you have a question about any aspect of the Nativity stories, a person that's mentioned, people mentioned, things, places, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Victoria is in Amboy, Washington, listening on 88.3 FM. Victoria, go ahead with your question for Steve Ray.
Hi, why did the angel of the Lord decide to go to the shepherds first instead of telling someone else?
I love that question, by the way, and I'm going to give you two answers. I'm going to give you first the real reason and then the clever reason. The first reason is because the shepherds were the lowest status of the community. They were not the owners of the sheep. They were basically poor guys who went out and lived with the sheep in the field. They didn't bring them back in every night. They would go way out into the fields, and today you can go to Shepherd's Field. We have Mass in the cave where the shepherds were. When we take our group, every time we did a big cave, we have Mass inside that cave where these shepherds actually were. And they lived out there with those animals for maybe weeks at a time. They were filthy. They were poor. They were the low-class people. And so it always says that God cares for the poor. And the poor, people like that, tend to be more receptive to the good news about God than, say, King Herod was. When you are rich and when you are so smart you think they are, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, King Herod, they all rejected the baby. They just know too much. They're arrogant. But the poor people and young people, children, that's why Jesus said, unless you become like a child, or he could even say, unless you become like a child and the poor, you'll never get to the kingdom of heaven. So he brought the news to the poor shepherds because he knew they would be excited and they would go back and announce the good news. Now, here's the clever answer why, and I think you'll like this one. When I'm at my pilgrimages and we're in that cave, I say to people, why do you think that the angels announced this to the shepherds first, the birth of Jesus? And they all don't know. And I say, it's always the shepherds who are the first to learn about the birth of a lamb. Jesus is the Lamb of God. And where are lambs born? In caves. Where were these shepherds? They were in a cave. Baby Jesus was in a cave. Shepherds are always the first ones to know about the birth of a lamb. Jesus is the Lamb of God. So they were the first ones to know about that.
What do you think, Victoria?
Yeah, that really makes sense.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you for taking my call.
Thank you for calling. We
Thank
appreciate
you,
it. Hope
Victoria.
you'll do it again sometime. Let's continue. Let's go to Stephen in Boston, Massachusetts. Stephen, you got a question for Steve Ray?
Hey, blessed remainder of Advent and Christmas.
Amen.
Again, all people listening, please support Catholic Answers.
Amen.
Long-time listener, Steve, to you with Teresa Tomeo. Great to have you. I know you've been on the show before. Topography, please, from the Annunciation to Cousin Elizabeth's, and then the topography travels from Bethlehem to Egypt. I just wanted a sense of it. I know it's built up.
Okay. Okay, good. I've made those trips many, many, many times, even the one to Egypt from Israel. We've driven there many times. When we're driving in our bus from Galilee in the north down to Bethlehem and Jerusalem in the south, I always say to people, oh, and remember, Mary is still walking, because we're in an air-conditioned bus, and it's very comfortable. But it just reminds people as we go along, and by the way, remember, Mary is still walking. When she went to visit Elizabeth, it was 90 miles, pretty much as the crow flies. And it's when you leave Nazareth, that's hilly country, very beautiful, very green, lush. It would have been probably in the springtime. It would have been very nice, not too hot yet. But once you get into May or June, it's normally about 100 degrees in Galilee area, 100 to 110 degrees, 80, it depends, but it can be very hot there, very uncomfortable. And it's pretty smooth until you get down towards Jerusalem area. Elizabeth lived in Ein Kerem, which is a subdivision about 5 miles west of Jerusalem. And if you read what it says where Mary went, it says she went into the hill country of Judea. And the last part of our ride, the last half an hour or so, is very hilly. It's mountainous and big gorges, and you drive back up and back down again. And so that would have been the most trying, as far as it's when the Bible says that even the prophecies of coming Messiah, that all the hills will be made low and the valleys will be raised up. It's in the Messiah by Handel. You can see why, because in a bus it doesn't matter, but when you're walking, I wish that hill would come down and I wish that valley would be raised up. But when you read the Bible, you have to put yourself in the footprints of those people who are walking everywhere, and why these images are used. But for the first part, it would have been very hot. When you get down into the Jerusalem area in the south, it cools off about 10 degrees less than in Galilee. It would have been more comfortable temperature-wise, but the hills would be very much, they're difficult. And I always tell people, when we go up to the Church of Visitation, it's a 15-minute walk up a big hill. And I said, this was the longest hill of all for Mary, because the last hill is always the longest. There it is. Got one more hill to go. Now, to Egypt, that's 250 miles away. And they would have walked down through it would have taken them into the Negev desert as they crossed from Bethlehem across southern Israel. And then they would walk probably along the coast of the Mediterranean. And they'd follow that around up to across the Nile River to Cairo. That's where the Jewish community lived at the time of Christ. There was a Jewish community that lived there. And there's actually a grotto, which in my movie on Mary, I take you down into that grotto and show you where the family lived for that 18 months supposedly they were there. But the Sinai desert, which they're going through the Sinai Peninsula, is very rugged. And I remember making fun of the Jews who complained against God when they were in the Sinai. Remember, you brought us out here to kill us. And I used to say, why didn't they just trust God? What's their problem, But the first time I drove across the Sinai along this route, probably close to where the Holy Family went, we had a windstorm, and it caused sand that made 2 and 3 foot drifts across the road. And it was sand in my eyes. My sand were gritty in my teeth. Our skin was gritty. And I said, man, if I was one of those Israelites, I think I'd have been the first one up to complain to Moses, why did you bring us out here? But imagine Mary and Joseph walking, and they would have walked that 250 miles across the Sinai Peninsula, all the way across the Nile River to get to the place where they stayed in Egypt. So they were tough. If nothing else, I like to say, I give a talk on Joseph. It's usually I give it at men's conferences, and I present Joseph as a manly man, not kind of the soft guy carrying the flower, the lily that we see in churches. Joseph was so tough. I'm looking at Cy right here. I'm convinced, Cy, that Joseph could pick you up and throw you across that desk without even trying. These were muscular men. They worked hard. They worked with stone and wood, and they walked for miles a day. Right. These were tough men, and Mary was a tough Jewish girl. We sing the song, Gentle Woman. God, I said, give me a break. Mary was a tough Jewish girl. She was a Jewish mother. Yes, she's holy. And yes, she's sinless, but that doesn't make her wimpy. Mary, she was a tough girl.
Stephen, thanks very much for that call from Boston and for that endorsement. We appreciate that. Let's go now to Greg in Shasta Lake, California, listening on EWTN Radio. Greg, go ahead with your question for Steve Ray.
Yes, Steve, I really liked your idea that the Star of Bethlehem was a special light controlled by GPS. But I was thinking my GPS sometimes doesn't take me on the most direct routes. So my question is, why did a heavenly GPS star take them up to Jerusalem and get them confused where they had to ask King Herod where the king was born? And then it shows up later and takes them back the other way.
That's an interesting question, and there does seem to be a time where the star is not there. The assumption would be is that if you're coming from a foreign country, you would come to Jerusalem because that is the main place. And they may know the baby's born in Bethlehem, or maybe they don't know that yet because the star hasn't taken them there yet. But maybe it's a matter of speculation. Maybe it was important that the government officials knew. Maybe for some reason God wanted Herod to know. I don't know that. But it does seem that the star did not appear for a while. And then after they left Herod, it says the star that had risen from the east that led them, now it took them over to the place where the babe was. So it's a matter of speculation why. I don't think the star led them to Herod. I think that they went to Herod because they were coming like emissaries from another kingdom, and Jerusalem would have been the capital of the country, and Bethlehem is just a little podunk town. And but you can speculate with me along with that, and when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask him though for sure. I want some more surety on these things. I really do wish the Bible gave us more information than it does sometimes.
Oh, of course. I mean, if you could, you'd get a videotape of it all. I mean,
I know.
But clearly, God has another plan for us. Let's try to get another question in before we have to go. Let's go to Andre in Manitoba, Canada, listening on Catholic.com. Andre, go ahead with your question for Steve Ray.
Yeah. So my question is, what is the meaning behind the nativity scene that we see in the Vatican this year? Because it stirred a lot of controversy, and I found it kind of strange, and I have really hard time understanding. So what?
Wait, Andre, just for clarity, I don't understand what's strange. You do not have a spaceman and an executioner in your personal nativity at home?
No, I actually don't.
What is wrong with you, Andre? I don't know what the Canadians are up to. Steve, go ahead. This is your chance to say what you want about the...
It's like in the Church of Annunciation, all these countries have provided mosaics and pictures of Mary. The whole Church of Annunciation has these from all different countries. Some of them are beautiful. The one the United States gave is Mary. She looks like the stainless steel queen, cold face, all made of iron, and she looks scary and frowning. I don't understand modern art, to be honest with you, Andre. I am still kind of a purist. I like things that portray. I don't necessarily want them to portray exactly what I see with my eyes, but I want them to at least show us something a bit natural, or at least to show the qualities of these people. I think that the nativity scene is horrendous. I really think it's offensive. It's horrendous. It's not going to draw anybody closer to Christ. It's not going to make anybody feel warm and close to the gospel, want to come into St. Peter's and bow down and worship the Lord. It's going to make people go, good grief, what in the world is that? And I have a good friend, Liz Lev, who is an art historian, and I wish I'd have called her and asked. I know what she thinks of it. She's already made some very snide comments on Facebook and Twitter and so on. And I know Liz, she's a great friend of mine, a historian of art, and I know exactly what she would say if I asked her what she thought of it. Same thing, I think. It's horrendous. It does nothing to inspire hope or joy or the humanity. What we're looking at the birth of Christ is God becoming a human baby. He's becoming a wiggly, squirmy, human, beautiful little baby that poops his diapers and spits up on you, and he grows up into a handsome young man. And when you look at that scene in the Vatican, it doesn't give you anything like that. It makes the Holy Family look like they just landed as telephone posts from space. And I really think it's a shame. It gives the world a really bad idea of who we are.
Hey, Andre, I really want to apologize that we weren't able to get Steve to give you a clear opinion on that, but maybe next time Steve will tell us what he really thinks. Steve, Ray, Merry Christmas to you and all of yours, because I know I won't get to say it to you between now and then.
Would you tell Jimmy Aiken hello for me? He's a dear friend of mine. We've just corresponded by email. Tell him I said hello.
I will tell him you said hello. Jimmy's coming up next. Hey, we talked about Steve's Big Bible conference online that he's doing in January and about 8 pilgrimages he's got planned for 2021. You can find out all about that and whatever else Steve is up to at CatholicConvert.com. That's an easy one. You can remember that. CatholicConvert.com. Thanks, Steve Ray.
Thank you, Cy. Can't wait till next year to join you again.
Amen, brother. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and every now and then I get to do what I want or talk about what I want. And the one thing I would like to do in preparing for Christmas is to talk to Jimmy Akin about the Nativity. And I've got a whole bunch of questions to ask Jimmy, so we're going to just make it a conversation this hour as we close out the week. So I hope it's a conversation that you will enjoy. We're going to let assistant producer Marie take a break for the hour. We won't be taking calls. We're just going to be having a discussion, me and Jimmy, about the Nativity of Jesus. Jimmy Akin, of course, is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the author of The Bible is a Catholic Book. Thanks for coming back and talking about baby Jesus with us.
Oh, my pleasure. And even though it's just a conversation, that doesn't mean you won't be saying the phone number.
Did I say it already? I don't know if I even did,
no,
but
yet,
I will. You're
yet.
Right. At some point, I will say it. You're right.
Just have it.
All right. Well, if we could just start by talking about the period of history that we're in, in which the Lord is born into. What's going on in the world at that time? What's going on in Israel at that time?
Okay, so people will be familiar with the history of Israel. The Israelites come into the Promised Land a little more than 1,000 years before the time of Christ, either in the 1400s or the 1200s BC. King David lives around the year 1000 BC, and Israel fairly quickly after David, it's just after Solomon, David's son, the kingdom breaks in two. And you have the northern tribes that secede from the southern tribes, and the northerners form the kingdom of Israel, and the south is the kingdom of Judah. And then the Assyrians end up conquering the 10 northern tribes and take many of them away to live over in Iraq and Iran, and that's where the 10 lost tribes are. Mm-hmm. And then the southern kingdom continues for a while, but then it gets conquered by Babylon. And Babylon gets conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire, and then they get conquered by the Greeks with Alexander the Great. And that's what spreads the Greek language all over this part of the world, because gave us the language of the New Testament. Greek had become the main international language, and so that's why people all over the place spoke it, and that's why the New Testament is written in Greek. In fact, even once Rome takes charge, they largely speak Greek in Rome, not just Latin. If you were educated in Rome, you spoke both Greek and Latin. And how Rome gets control is kind of interesting. Now, after Alexander the Great died, his kingdom, his empire, fell apart. And when he died under some rather mysterious circumstances. We're not exactly sure what killed him. It may have been a drinking bout. It may have been a disease. But when he was dying, he allegedly was asked, to whom should the kingdom go? Because he was so young, he was just in his 30s. He didn't have an appointed successor. And he had a son, but his son was retarded and was not really fit to govern. So they didn't know who his successor was going to be. And he allegedly said, the kingdom goes to the fittest. Mm-hmm. And that was a
very
signal
Darwinian.
for conflict among his generals. And he had 4 main generals that after his death decided not to fight each other. Rather than have a big war for control of the empire, they were at Babylon at the time in Iraq, and they said, let's just divide up the kingdom into 4 pieces. And that was what was known as the settlement of Babylon. So they set up 4 dynasties in different areas of Alexander's empire, but their successors got into conflict with each other. So even though they didn't have a big immediate war, there were wars. And Israel happened to be in a border zone between 2 of the successor empires. One is the Ptolemaic Empire. The Ptolemies were the Greek pharaohs of Egypt. After Alexander, took over Egypt, it was Greeks in charge. And then up in Syria, there was another dynasty called the Seleucids. And the Seleucids and the Ptolemies would war with each other, and Israel was caught in the middle. And eventually, Israel it had some limited autonomy after they came back from the Babylonian exile, but it was kind of fragile, and you had a succession dispute in Israel, and the Seleucids got involved and ended up taking over. And that's what gave us the holiday of Hanukkah.
Oh yeah,
that's being celebrated right now, because the Seleucid king Antiochus Epiphanes desecrated the temple at Jerusalem, and so when the Maccabees revolted and reclaimed autonomy, they rededicated the temple, and that's what Hanukkah is. It's the feast of rededication. And Jesus himself celebrated Hanukkah. It's mentioned in John chapter 10 that he was in Jerusalem for the celebration of the feast of dedication, and that's what that is. That's Hanukkah. So the Maccabees then led to a dynasty called the Hasmoneans, and they ruled Israel for a while into the 1st century BC. But then they had a succession dispute. There were a couple of rival brothers who both wanted to be king of Israel, or of Judah, and so they did what their ancestors had. They decided to appeal to a foreign power, because Rome was now the rising foreign power, and 63 BC, and his solution was take over Israel, or take over the Holy Land. And he came into Jerusalem, and he even entered the temple and demanded to see the Holy of Holies. He thought there was going to be like a big idol or a great treasure or something in the Holy of Holies where the Ark of the Covenant had been, and he was surprised that, no, it's empty. And of course, the Jews were horrified by a Gentile, because only the high priest is supposed to go in there only once a year. And here's this uncircumcised Roman pagan general going in there. So, but they couldn't stop him. And the Romans had a system where they tended not, in many cases, to rule directly. They would have local client kings. And the guy that ended up getting picked for that was Herod the Great. And so he was a kind of wheeler-dealer conniver. His father had been a high official. He was only really kind of half Jewish. He was an Idumean, which meant he was Jewish by faith, but not by ethnicity, because the Maccabees had forcibly converted the Idumeans to Judaism. And so that's how Herod ends up getting on the throne. So this Roman rule was actually quite recent. And there was still a lot of memory of the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, in other words, and all that they had done to promote Jewish independence.
Right.
And there was this, in fact, there's a study that's done in different fields of what names, what baby names are popular. And if you look at the baby names that were popular in 1st century Judaism, they're all like members of the Maccabee family. That's why we have John and Johns and Judases and things like that, and Jameses all over in the New Testament. Those are Maccabean names. And so they're really idolizing the Maccabees, and they're hoping there's going to be, there's this prophecy that the Messiah is coming. And even neighboring peoples had prophecies of a great king arising in this area. And so everybody in Israel is all ginned up about the idea that we're going to have a repeat of the Maccabees. We're going to have a Messiah born who's going to kick out these Romans and restore independence to us and restore the kingdom to Israel.
Also, all of that is the setting into which he's born then. Right. So it's almost like a kind of globalism, really. I mean, it's not the whole globe, but it's very multicultural. The Greeks had tried to put it all under cosmopolitan. There you go. A very cosmopolitan setting. Right there at a crossroads of Asia and Africa and Europe.
Yes, yeah, and it if you want to evangelize the world, starting from a juncture like that is a logical place to start. So there may be a reason God put the Holy Land right there.
We have to take a quick break. Jimmy Akin's here with us, and I'm going to ask him whatever I want about the Nativity because it's just fun to get to ask Jimmy and pick his brain about all the things and that we know about that time, the things that we don't know, the things we might speculate about. So we'll have a little bit of fun talking about the Nativity this hour. We have a free ebook that we're still giving out, Day by Day, Advent Apologetics. Lots of great answers to questions that will be, probably if the family gets together, people will be asking questions about the faith, or things will come up and you might want to have some solid answers. You can get them in Day by Day Advent Apologetics. It's the free ebook available right now at shop.catholic.com.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Greetings, I'm Jerry Usher, co-host of Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, heard at noon and midnight Eastern here on EWTN Radio. This Advent, slow down, quiet your heart, allow the Holy Spirit to reveal more deeply to you the true meaning of the Christmas season we'll be preparing for. The birth of Jesus on Christmas morning is an occasion of great joy. Remember, the better we prepare during Advent, the more joyful will be our Christmas. May God bless you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. 1 week now until Christmas. Next Friday is Christmas Day, and so we're trying to help you get into the spirit of Christmas Day and be prepared, kind of have your heart and soul prepared for welcoming the Lord. And so we're talking about the Nativity of Jesus. I almost gave out the phone number there, Jimmy. Almost did it.
And you resisted.
One save. I did. I resisted. If I could, Jimmy, I'm going to ask you about the sources for what we know about the Nativity. But first, I want to ask you about the census, because was this a common thing in the ancient world? Is the census? It's the census and pay the tax. Is that the purpose of the census, or does the census have some other purpose?
The truthful answer is we don't know exactly what this was. What Luke says is that the decree went out from Caesar Augustus that the whole world should be enrolled. And the question is, enrolled how and in what?
Yeah.
Now, a very common theory is that it was a tax census. And so you would, count heads and charge everybody a certain amount of money, maybe based on the amount of land that they owned. And that's a possibility. The Romans did have, taxes. So every government has taxes,
right?
And so that's one of the, they say two things are certain: death and taxes. Well, as soon as money was invented, and really even before money was invented, there have been taxes.
Yeah.
In the old days, they'd take a share of your produce if you weren't using money. So the Romans definitely had taxes, and they periodically did tax censuses. There's some question about which one this is, though.
Okay.
We don't. Now, part of the difficulty is you need to identify in what year is Jesus born in order to say, well, was there a worldwide tax census at this time? And so that's one issue that complicates this. Another is the fact that we don't necessarily have complete records of everything the Romans did.
Yeah.
Because a lot has been lost. We know they had certain tax censuses, some of which were local, but it's been a little difficult to identify a specific one that Luke would have been talking about. And so there are other proposals too. One of the things that we know about Augustus is that at a certain point in the year 3/2 BC, there was an event where the whole people of Rome, all the Roman Empire, swore allegiance to him as the father of the country.
Oh, okay.
And Josephus, the first century Jewish historian, records that that 6,000 Pharisees refused to say the oath, but everybody else, even in Israel, did. And so a proposal that some contemporary scholars have been exploring is maybe that's what this was.
Oh.
Because if you think Jesus was born in the year 3 or 2 BC, it could have been this this oath of allegiance to Augustus as the father of the nation. And that might be it. On the other hand, it might have been a tax census. And one thing that people have puzzled over is the fact that Luke says this was when Quirinius was governing Syria. Quirinius was a Roman official who was set out as a governor, and one of his assignments was to govern Syria. And it's hard to see how that squares up with what Luke says, because we know about Quirinius being an official governor of Syria later than this, like in the first decade after the birth of Christ. And so some scholars have said, well, how does this all match up? One proposal is that it's sometimes translated, this was the first census under Quirinius. So there might have been a later one that we know about, and we just don't know about this. But actually, the Greek can also be translated before the census with Quirinius. And so it could be that Luke is clarifying, no, don't think about the famous census under Quirinius. It's not that one, it's before.
I see. Oh, okay.
And so we're not entirely sure what this event was, but there are a number of possibilities. So if you hear a skeptic saying, oh, Luke is just wrong, no, there are multiple resolutions to this. The question is, which is the right one? Obviously, Luke knew what he was talking about, or he wouldn't bother mentioning this, because he's clearly trying to refer to something his audience will know about. Right. It's just that at this distance, we don't have as much knowledge as his original audience did.
Okay, so you mentioned Luke there because the census is mentioned in Luke's gospel, and Luke is one of the sources we have for the Nativity. Can you just talk in general about the sources that we have for understanding the birth of Jesus?
The two best sources are Matthew and Luke. Both Matthew and Luke have what are called infancy narratives that deal with the childhood of Jesus. It's Matthew chapters 1 and 2, and also Luke chapters 1 and 2. And those are our primary sources of information. We do have other sources of information. Paul mentions the birth of Jesus a little bit. I mean, we have statements elsewhere in the New Testament that he's born of a virgin, or born of woman, and things like that. So we have slight references, but nowhere near as much detail as we get from Matthew and Luke. Also, outside of the New Testament, we have a variety of early Christian documents that also record traditions about the birth of Christ. The earliest one that I'm familiar with is a work called The Ascension of Isaiah, which appears to have been written about AD 67. And it records some significant traditions about the birth of Jesus that we can talk about. We also there's another work from the first century, from the end of the first century, called the Odes of Solomon, which has an ode or hymn about Mary. And so we have some traditions there. We also, in the 2nd century, we have some traditions from St. Justin Martyr in the mid-2nd century. There's also a document known that we often mention on Catholic Answers Live, known as the Proto-Evangelium of James, or the Infancy Gospel of James, that has traditions about the birth of Christ. And there are others as well. So it's not only Matthew and Luke, but Matthew and Luke are the two best sources.
So when you look at Matthew and Luke, however, then what are their sources? Do we have any hint about that? Because they tell different aspects. So it doesn't. Okay, I'm just going to throw out an idea to you, and you tell me if I'm wrong about this. None of this material is in Mark. Luke and Matthew tell the same story, but they give different details about it. One with the Magi and one with the shepherds. And so it would seem like they have different sources, but what do you make of it?
Well, all of this material about Jesus' infancy had to come from Jesus' family. Now,
right.
because they were the only ones keeping track of it. So Joseph could be one of the tradition bearers or tradents, to use a fancy word for it. Mary could be one of the tradents. Jesus himself could be one of the tradents, and other family members could be too. But somehow this all has to come from Jesus's family. And we know who at least one of the tradents was. Now, it's quite possible that Jesus could have told the disciples about some of this stuff himself. I don't have any evidence for that, but it's possible. But he may well have. But we do really well know who one of the tradents in the family was, and that's Mary. Because in Luke twice, now I should mention, ancient authors had ways of telling you who their source of information was without using a footnote, which is what we do today. We use a footnote. Ancient authors had other ways of doing it. One of them is a literary technique called an inclusio. And an inclusio is where you mention a person at the beginning of a story and at the end of a story so that it includes that entire story. And this is a way that ancient authors would signal, this is my source. It's the guy who's present from the beginning to the end of it.
I see.
And we see that with Peter in the Gospel of Mark. Peter's there at the beginning and the end. He's the primary source for the information in Mark. Luke, in the infancy narrative, twice mentions Mary, and he mentions her more than that, but he mentions her twice in a very specific way. He says, Mary treasured these things in her heart.
Right.
And that's another way of saying Mary remembered this.
Yes.
And the fact that Luke is telling us Mary remembered this is Luke's way of saying Mary is the tradent. She's the source of this information. And that could mean that Luke talked to Mary personally and interviewed her, or it could mean that Luke talked to people and interviewed people who had talked to Mary.
Yeah.
But one way or another, Luke is telling us this information in the infancy narrative is coming from Mary.
I gotcha. All right. Jimmy Akin is our guest. We're talking about the Nativity of the Lord with Jimmy. The date, I suppose, is one thing people always want to know about. What day was he born? Obviously, 0. I mean, so when was he born? I mean, I was taught, I have to say, I was taught quite explicitly when I was in college by Bible teachers, 6 BC.
Okay, and you will commonly hear 6 BC. The logic for that goes, well, we know from Matthew and Luke that he was born during the reign of Herod the Great. Herod died in 4 BC, it is said, and he seems to have been born up to 2 years before Herod died, because that's how old he was when the Magi show up. And so if you take 4 BC and you go back a couple of years, you get to 6 or 7 BC. And so that's a commonly accepted date. The problem is the evidence for that is not actually good. The evidence is that Herod died later than 4 BC, that Herod died actually in 1 BC. Josephus is our source of information about when Herod died, and he says he died between a certain type of eclipse and Passover, and that did occur in 4 BC, but they were way too close together for all the events that Josephus mentions.
Okay.
The better fit is in 1 BC. Okay. And if you say 1 BC, you back up a year or two, you get to 2 or 3 BC. And that's what the church fathers say. There's a consensus among the church fathers that it's 3 or 2 BC. And that's what Luke seems to indicate. In Luke 3, Luke says that John the Baptist began his ministry in the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar. Tiberius came to the throne in AD 14. His 15th year would be AD 29. He also says that when Jesus begins his ministry just after John the Baptist, he was about 30 years old. So you take AD 29, subtract 30, you would think that would be 1 BC, but there's no year 0.
Yeah.
So it actually is 2 BC. And so Luke also points at 3 or 2 BC.
And the thing is that there were calculations made by Dennis the Short, right, making the calendar.
Dionysius Exiguus.
Yeah, and so he was not quite guessing, but he didn't have all the information we have now when he made the year 81, the year that it was. That had he
1 BC technically.
Yeah, 1 BC. Okay, so 1 BC, the year that it was, he didn't have the. That was it was a very well-educated guess, but yeah.
And all of these are guesses, but the evidence is that Dennis the Short missed it by like a year or so.
Okay. Jimmy Akin is our guest. We're talking about the nativity of the Lord. If you, I almost said if you have questions, but no, we're not taking questions. We're just talking with Jimmy. I got a whole list of questions, and I'm going to keep moving through them. I want to ask about whether Jesus was really born on December 25th, and something about we'll ask a couple questions about the genealogies of Jesus, which are not the same, and a whole bunch of other stuff when we come back right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
If you spend any time on Twitter, Facebook, or mainstream media, you're probably familiar with the litany of slogans that skeptics employ to rescue you from the foolish belief that God exists. The constant onslaught seems to leave people with the idea that they have no alternative but to embrace atheism. How can a Christian respond? In One Less God Than You, John DeRosa breaks down 20 of the most common atheist challenges and shows you how to craft effective answers. Atheism is more aggressive and widespread than ever. Read One Less God Than You and prepare yourself to respond with the joyful truth that God is real. To get your copy of One Less God Than You, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
To many people, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I'll give you the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Have you subscribed to the Catholic Answers Radio Club newsletter? This is Catholic Answers Live host Cy Kellett, and I want to tell you about our new weekly newsletter full of behind-the-scenes information and facts you need to know about the show. It's easy to sign up. Just visit CatholicAnswersLive.com and look for the newsletter sign-up box on the front of the page. It's a great way to keep up to date with what's happening with the show and see what's coming in the days ahead, delivered weekly into your inbox. Sign up today for the Catholic Answers Radio Club newsletter and see what you've been missing. Go to CatholicAnswersLive.com.
Monday on More to Life, Home for the Holiday.
Holidays looking a bit different this year. We'll help you make them special.
That's Monday on More to Life. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm getting to talk with Jimmy Akin about the nativity, and I've got so many questions. I thought, I'm just going to make this a conversation because, maybe you're doing some baking or taking care of things and maybe even traveling. I don't know. And it'd be nice to just hear from Jimmy about the nativity of the Lord. So that's what we're doing this hour. Let's go to December 25th then. We talked about the year he was born.
Okay.
Some people, no way he was born on December 25th. What are the chances? Is it 1 in 365 or is it better?
I think it's better than 1 in 365, but I also don't think it's certain.
Yeah, okay.
You will have, the Gospels really don't give us information about this. And actually, birthdays don't seem to have been commonly celebrated by ordinary people. This is something that is kind of surprising to people because in our culture, birthdays are very important. Every kid looks forward to his birthday. Parents know exactly when the kid's birthday is going to be, at least the mothers do.
Yeah.
And birthdays are just a huge thing for us. And so there can be a tendency on the part of a lot of modern people to think, oh, well, of course, Mary, they would celebrate Jesus' birthday, and Jesus and Mary would have known exactly when this was, and it's so important. Of course, they would have passed it on, and later Christians would have known about it. Well, if it was that important, it would be in Matthew or in Luke.
Yeah, right.
Clearly, it wasn't that important that this tradition be passed on. Also, though, the evidence really is that ordinary people in this culture in this time tended to frown on birthdays. Birthdays were something that were celebrated by royalty. Mm-hmm. They would have these big lavish parties, and they sometimes would get up to no good. I mean, there would be gluttony, there would be drunkenness, there could be sexual immorality. You could have your favorite prophet have his head brought in on a platter.
Oh, I forgot about that. Right.
Yeah. Birthdays were kind of frowned upon. There's only, if memory serves, there's two people in the Bible that have birthdays mentioned. One is Pharaoh, and one is the son of Herod the Great that cuts off John the Baptist's head. And if you look at the early church fathers, they are kind of down on birthdays. Now, there's nothing wrong with birthdays, but the way they looked at it, they would say, oh, well, this is not a good thing to celebrate. You have these wicked examples, and what's really important is your birthday into heaven, which is the day you die. Mm-hmm. So you'll find early church fathers saying, do not celebrate birthdays if you're a sincere Christian. Now, that was their opinion. That was their time. That's not for us. Birthdays are fine. But they just didn't emphasize them. And even today, in some places, people have no idea what their birthday was. In fact, a lot of times people in certain cultures, like among the Bedouins today in Israel, they won't know how old they are. Oh, they'll know approximately, yeah, I was born during the reign of this prime minister, but I don't know exactly what year it was. Uh-huh. And this has been kind of startling for anthropologists from the West to discover that. So we don't have certainty about what exact day Jesus was born. The only piece of evidence that is cited against Jesus being born December 25th from the Gospels is the fact that Luke records the shepherds were out in their fields on the night Jesus was born. And you'll have a lot of Western scholars who have said things like, well, it couldn't have been in December then because it's too cold to keep sheep outdoors.
Yeah.
And that's absolute nonsense. In fact, to this day, shepherds pasture their flocks in Israel, in Bethlehem, on December 25th. There's a famous letter from one biblical scholar to another back in the 1960s who was there in Shepherd's Field, and he was like, oh, guess what? The shepherds have their sheep out, and they even have the baby lambs with them. So this is not an argument against Jesus being born December 25th. In fact, if you actually study up on winter sheep care, if you Google winter sheep care, you will find out sheep have wool. And
I already knew that.
and that keeps them warm
in
the cold weather. In fact, like other animals, they fleece up for the cold weather. And they evolved growing up outdoors in the winter. They didn't have barns, in 10,000 BC. Mm-hmm. That was the sheep weren't even domesticated then. And so they naturally live outdoors during the winter, and they're just fine. And in fact, they didn't have big heated sheep barns to put the sheep in the winter in first century Israel. So yeah, they were out there in the wintertime. In fact, sheep can get snow on them, and they do just fine because of that wool that traps the body heat. Mm-hmm. And keeps the sheep warm. So that's not really a good argument. If you look at what the church fathers have to say on this question, you get a mix of dates. You don't have a clear consensus like you do about the year. You don't have a clear consensus about the day. You get December 25th is one of the first days that we see being proposed. So is January 6th. And there are a few at other times of the year where some church fathers think it was a different day elsewhere in the year. But now, by the way, you also sometimes hear people trying to link this to a pagan holiday, and the arguments for that also are not good. But the early, you don't have church fathers saying, hey, let's hijack a pagan holiday so people will have an alternative wholesome celebration. They don't say things like that. The ones who support December 25th say that's when I think he was born.
Yeah, right.
And so they're not, they don't betray an ulterior motive in what they're writing about this. So we don't know for sure. December 25th is a possibility, and it is one of the dates that's supported by the early church fathers. Now, there's another date that some have proposed based on the Bible. If you look in Revelation chapter 12, John sees a vision of a woman in heaven who is clothed with the sun, has the moon at her feet, and has a crown of 12 stars. Okay. The ancients were into astronomical signs. You know, you had that's what brought the Magi to Israel, for example. Also, it says there right there in Genesis 1, God made the stars for signs. And so ancient people were looking for signs in the sky.
Right.
And it has been proposed by biblical scholars that John is encoding, because the woman then gives birth to Christ.
Yeah.
John is encoding information about when Jesus was born using astronomical signs. So, who's the woman in the sky, would you guess?
Mary.
Famous, no, not biblical. Think constellations.
Oh, the woman in the sky. Oh, in the constellations. Oh,
the
no.
The famous Virgin constellation, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, Virgo?
Virgo, that's right. And it so happens that periodically the sun will be in mid-body for Virgo, and the moon will be at the feet of Virgo.
Oh.
Now the sun goes mid-body every year, because the sun is passing through the zodiac, and so at some point in the year it's going to hit mid-body on Virgo. But the question is then, is the moon at the same time going to be at her feet? And that doesn't happen so often. But it did happen on September 11th, 3 BC. And so some people have proposed September 11th, 3 BC as Jesus' birthday.
How interesting and clever. And they were just so much more aware than we are. Like for us, we'd be like, well, that's kind of magnificently obscure. It's not possible. But they really were much more aware of the sky than we are, of what was going on up there. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Jimmy. Shall I give you another question? Well, let me ask you this before we have to go to a break. Why are Matthew and Luke's narratives so different? They don't read the same at all. I mean, I shouldn't say at all, but in general, they don't read the same. So
they incorporate certain basic facts. There are about a dozen facts that they both mention. You know, Jesus is born of a virgin. He was born in the reign of Herod the Great, things like that. His parents were Mary and Joseph, and so forth. But then they record these very different stories. And I think the reason for that is because one is right. I think it's two reasons. One of them is writing to supplement the other. I think the authors of Matthew and Luke were aware of each other.
Yeah.
And so either Matthew wrote first and Luke is supplementing what Matthew said. Or, and I personally favor this, I think Luke wrote first and Matthew supplemented what Luke was doing. So I think that supplemental motive is one of the reasons they're different. The other, I think, is the audiences they're serving. My guess, and it's not more than a guess, but my guess is Matthew had Luke in front of him, and he says, "Oh, there's all this stuff about Mary," and he's got with his genealogy Jesus descending from David's son Nathan, not from Solomon. And how is my Jewish Christian audience that I'm writing for going to react to that? I don't know that they're that interested in all this Mary stuff and in the way he descends from Nathan. I think they are going to want to hear more about Joseph, who's the legal descendant of David for purposes of his messiahship, and how Joseph descends from Solomon, who was the king. And so I think Matthew came along, he saw what Luke said, and yeah, this is all right, but I don't think it serves the interest of my audience as well as this other material.
Yeah.
And so I think he deliberately went with other material because he doesn't have space in a gospel. They needed to fit in a single scroll.
Yeah.
Because they were so expensive. They needed to just be one volume works. And so he has to say, well, I have this other material that I really want to tell my audience about, so I'm just not going to include this stuff.
I see. Yeah, right. So you wouldn't, you don't. He doesn't need to do both genealogies. Luke has that one. Let me tell you the one that goes for Joseph's family, that includes Solomon. And as you have said, over 1,000 years, there's probably 10 million different ways you could arrange Jesus descending from David. I mean, I don't know how many.
Absolutely. There are multiple lines of descent.
Yeah, right.
Because of the ways these works. Like Queen Elizabeth is descended from William the Conqueror like 100 different ways or something. And Jesus descended from David multiple different ways. But there's actually, and we may want to touch on this after the break, there's actually an interesting reason why Matthew and Luke may have highlighted these two different lines of descent.
Okay, we'll do that right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
The only thing new about the heresies in the church and the schisms in the church today is it's mixed with satanic worship. We in the church have gone from enneagrams to centering prayer to solstice worship to goddesses. And you buy it as something new.
For more information on Mother Angelica, visit Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest. Okay, so Jimmy, we're in the midst of talking, in a general conversation about the nativity of Jesus. We're in the midst of talking about the two different lineages given for Jesus in Matthew and Luke. You wanted to make one more point about that.
Yeah. Also, I should mention, there's a common idea you hear that Matthew's is Joseph's lineage and Luke's is Mary's. And it's actually hard to support that, given the evidence, because that is not what Luke says. Luke does not mention Mary in his genealogy at all. So it's hard to suppose that this is Mary's genealogy. But there's an interesting reason why they may have focused on these two different lines of descent. In the Old Testament, there is a curse placed on Jeconiah, king of Israel, at the time of the Babylonian exile. It says none of his sons are going to sit on the throne. And there's also another prophecy about the future restoration of the Davidic monarchy, where it says a shoot will grow from the stump of Jesse. This is a famous messianic prophecy.
Right.
And so some Jews apparently put that together and said, okay, so none of Jeconiah's descendants, because they could all be called his sons, none of Jeconiah's descendants are ever going to be on the throne of Israel. Instead, a different branch from Jesse, who was the father of David, a different branch of the Davidic family is going to become king, and there will be a new dynasty. Now, Jeconiah was descended from Solomon, and so according to some interpretations, it could not be from the Solomon line that ran through Jeconiah that the Messiah would come. Instead, he'd come from a different lineage from the Davidic family. But that wasn't certain, because there are other ways of taking the Jeconiah prophecy. Maybe it just meant none of his immediate sons are going to be on the throne because of the Babylonian exile, but that doesn't say anything about his long-term descendants.
I see.
And so you could have these two schools of thought, and it's possible that that's why Matthew and Luke use these two different lines. It's a way of saying, look, whichever theory you like about the Jeconiah curse, Jesus still qualifies. If you think the Messiah needs to be a descendant of Solomon, he is. And if you think he needs to be a descended from a different son of David than Solomon, he is. Because he's got more than one line of descent.
I want to ask you about the Star of David. Excuse me, the star that that leads the Magi. Yeah, the Star of Bethlehem. And what is it, and who were the Magi? And this is in Matthew's Gospel, not mentioned in Luke's Gospel.
Right. So it's hard to know for sure what the star was. You've got a bunch of different proposals. I mean, the Aetherius Society thinks it was an alien spaceship, but they're wrong.
On so many things, the Aetherius Society. So many things.
Yeah, actually a lot of things.
Yeah.
You'll also have the idea that it was a comet, but it probably was not a comet. Comets were seen in the ancient world as omens of disaster, not the births of kings. You've had the proposal it could be a meteor, but meteors last for like a fraction of a second. They don't hang in the sky the way this thing did for the Magi. It's been proposed it was a supernatural phenomenon. And that's often based on the idea that they were following it, that it was leading them around, and then it came to hover over the house saying, this is the house.
Yeah.
That's not actually what the text says. I know, and in this area, I'm just giving my opinion. Other people can have different opinions, but based on, and that's fine. Based on my read of the evidence, though, I don't think that's likely, because all the text really says is that the star was in front of them on the way to Bethlehem. And when they found the house, the star was above it. So it doesn't say the star was moving around in an unusual way. Also, if there was an unexpected new star, they wouldn't know how to interpret it, because it wouldn't fit in to their system of astrology.
Yeah, right.
And it wouldn't have any meaning. It's this new star. What are we supposed to make of that? So I think it was an established star, and because the fixed stars that just orbit every day, don't move around, they don't have a lot of significance by themselves. The way ancient astrology worked was you looked at the planets, the wandering stars that move around in the sky, and you say, what part of the sky is this planet in? And that has a meaning. And there was one particular planet that was associated with kingship. Now, we kind of need to know about where the Magi were from in order to have a good guess at what kind of system of astrology they were using. A lot of times it's assumed that they were using Greek astrology, because that's what most Western astrology is based on, was Greek astrology. But they came from the East.
Yeah.
So why would they be using Greek astrology? There are different theories about who they could have been. I know Father Longnecker has a book suggesting they may have been Nabateans. I look forward to reading his argument. I haven't had a chance to yet. In the Church Fathers, you have a lot of people saying they were from Persia or Arabia or Babylon. Babylon is a very promising candidate. And we know a good bit about Babylonian astrology because we've got the records. You know, they had astrological books that we've found. And in Babylonian astrology, like in other astrologies of the period, Jupiter was the planet associated with kings. And Jupiter, by coincidence, in December of 2 BC, was hanging in the sky in the south as you were walking from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. So, and Jupiter is associated with a bunch of other stuff. It's actually fascinating. In Babylonian astrology, they had a whole bunch of signs involving Jupiter and Venus and Regulus, which was a star that they also regarded as connected with kingship. And one of my favorite examples is they had, if there is a lunar eclipse and Jupiter is not in the sky for the lunar eclipse, if the kingship star is not in the sky when the lunar eclipse occurs, that means the current king in Babylon is going to die. And so what they did to protect the current king is they appointed a substitute king. They took they had this substitute.
Way to do that.
Yeah,
nice.
They had a substitute king ritual where they took a condemned criminal who was going to die anyway. They made him king for like 3 months. They had the real king demoted to like, oh, he's a farmer now, and we're having the priest talk about him like he's just a farmer now, and this is the real king over here, the condemned criminal guy. And then they would wait out the danger period and then execute the condemned criminal, and the real king would assume his throne again.
I swear there's a movie in there. There's got to be a movie in there.
It's kind of like the Mikado.
Yeah.
But according to Babylonian astrology, there were certain signs involving Jupiter that would indicate the current king in Babylon is going to be overthrown. And there was another sign that said a important king is going to be born in a land called Amuru. Amuru is west from Babylon, but it's on this side of the Mediterranean. So that points us at, it's not as far west as Greece or Rome. It's on the eastern side of the Mediterranean, so that points to Israel. And these signs involving Jupiter happened in 3 and 2 BC.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a very interesting book out on this subject that suggests, okay, they saw the signs saying the king of Babylon's going to be overthrown. There's going to be this great king born in the west. Let's head west and go to the only semi-independent king in the area, the major one, Herod the Great, and make peace early to get this new king on our side so that when he knocks over the king of Babylon, we will benefit from that.
Yeah.
And that, according to this theory, is is what they saw and how it motivated them. And one of the signs is also the one from the book of Revelation. So there's a lot of stuff converging here, even though we can't be sure of everything. There's a lot of stuff converging here on this 3-2 BC time frame that makes sense in terms of Babylonian astrology.
Jimmy, before we have to end today, I just want to ask you, because you hinted at it earlier, is there any information outside the Bible, in addition to this kind of astrological information, that we should be aware of as far as the nativity of Jesus?
Yeah, so one of the things that several of these early documents, like the Ascension of Isaiah and the Proto-Evangelium of James mentioned, is that Mary had a miraculous birth, that it was not just a normal birth, that something miraculous happened. This is mentioned in the Ascension of Isaiah, which, like I said, seems to date to the year AD 67. Also, it's mentioned in the Proto-Evangelium of James in the mid-2nd century. The Proto-Evangelium of James also says Jesus was born in a cave, and that's the Grotto of the Nativity in Bethlehem today. And other ancient sources also indicate that he was born in a cave, because houses were often constructed based on caves, and people would keep their animals inside, and that's why Mary is laying Jesus in a manger, according to these early sources, in a cave, because at the time it was a home. There was a section of the home that was reserved for the animals, and the main dining area, the Cataluma, was full of people. And so that's why they were in this other part of the house. Incidentally, when Jesus is, later in Luke, when Jesus is sending the disciples to go find the upper room so they can have Passover, he says, ask for where the Cataluma is, where I'm going to receive it. So this was not a traveler's inn necessarily. It could just be a part of a house where people lived and met and ate, and that's what was full.
Jimmy Akin, thanks very, very much. I appreciate it. Oh, you know what? You have written about the accounts of Jesus' childhood at jimmyakin.com, right? If people want to read more, they can go there.
It's called How the Accounts of Jesus' Childhood Fit Together.
At jimmyakin.com, A-K-I-N. Jimmy, thanks very much. Have a great weekend.
You too, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, yes. It's upon us now, just a week away. I probably should start my Christmas shopping. I probably should get started on that. We'll see. Maybe this weekend. Well, that does it for us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.